If Peter Brock can get up and win this round today, he will have won 3 out of the 7 rounds and not won the title.
Johnson, on the other hand, would have won only one, won the title, which, as I was saying earlier, I'm sure is the way that no racing driver wants to win a series.
And now Johnson comes...
Consistency as Grice goes for Johnson, and I'd reckon we'll have him, although Johnson has an awfully useful amount of power and torque onto the straight.
Grice is forced to drop in behind Johnson. Will come out of him at the end of the chute. There he goes.
Just about got him. If he can stay there, he's got him.
When Grice sets himself up in a situation like that, you've got to be a very brave man to come down on top of him, because he really does give no quarter.
Ran well at Le Mans, Alan Grice. Ran with Chris Craft and Alain de Cadenet in a Porsche 956. It was as Fury.
Oh, George Fury is gone.
And Fury pulls off out of first place. Peter Brock leads.
On lap 11.
Second place is Alan Grice. Third place as Fury parks the car, and Gary Scott, of course, in the second car continues. So it's Brock, Grice, Johnson, first, second, third. And I might say Gary Scott fourth, in front of Warren Cullen, Steve Harrington, and a long gap from Harrington back to Jim Richards in the next position. He's got a lot of ground to make up, about 8 seconds at least, to try and make one place.
So on lap 12, George Fury finishes his Australian Touring Car title, having claimed 1 win at Lakeside and a 5th at Sandown. With that exception, he's had 3 failures to finish and 1 failure to start. And that's a great disappointment for a car which really was showing a lot of promise.
So the race complexion very different, with just 1.85 seconds now sandwiching the first 3, Brock, Grice and Johnson. I was saying earlier that Grice, with these 2 very experienced Le Mans competitors, Alain de Cadenet and Chris Craft, distinguished himself. As we look now at Warren Cullen and Steve Harrington,
they're racing for 5th position.
He was the fastest of the 3 in the Porsche 956. But Warren Cullen here doing a good job against young Steve Harrington. And just in front is Gary Scott, George Fury's teammate, holding 4th place. So you're looking at the battle for 4th, 5th and 6th. One that lost Peter McLeod, Jim Richards, George Fury with mechanical problems leading to his retirement. But there you see Gary Scott. He'll be running probably more conservative turbocharger boost and be told to finish at all costs by team manager Howard Marsden, who's just returned from 2 weeks in Japan to discuss with the Japanese their involvement next year in motor racing. He says the answer is positive, but I only got back on Saturday morning, and I have to refer to my management before I make public what we've found out. But they've accepted really what we wanted. So hopefully Nissan will be with us, the Touring Car Championship in Group A next year, as Harrington attacks Cullen.
Harrington having his last run in this motor car. It's actually been sold to a hill climb driver who'll campaign it later this year. And the Harrington Roadways team is building up a new car for Harrington and Grice to drive in the James Hardy 1000 and the Castrol 400 later this year. Andrew Harris, Warren Cullen's Kmart teammate, is in the pits.
Few drivers going for new cars for Bathurst. Peter Brock will be in a new car. 2 new cars, VK Commodores.
Here comes Harrington.
As Harrington goes on to Cullen for Bathurst. That's the 6-window Commodore model. So the Peter Brock car that's currently leading this race will be on hire for Bathurst to a team for somewhere around, say, $50,000. All you've got to do is bring your drivers and your wheel-changing rattle guns and so on, and they will give you a car in white. You can sign write it with your sponsors, and that's the car that Peter Brock's leading this race with at the moment. Only done about 12 races, debuted at Sandown last year. This is the one we're talking about.
Interesting point score situation, Will, that if Peter Brock can hold off Alan Grace, who now goes for the inside, and Brock tries to hold him, can he do it?
He's tentative on Grace because he knows how forceful Grace can be, and he's prepared to let him have it. Grace leads now from Brock. So we've had a number of leaders: Fury, Brock, Johnson, Grace. McLeod was up very close to the lead early on.
Breaking duel at the end of the straight, and Alan Grace weaving all over the place and giving Peter Brock nowhere to go.
Alan Grace scheduled to drive 3 cars at this meeting. Hasn't quite achieved it. The Nissan Pulsar Turbo Sedan in the Super Series didn't run very reliably and he retired. He's also down for a Formula Pacific in the opening round of the Australian Gold Star, but the car is still in customs and not quite ready yet for its owner, Alan Brown. So 6 rounds completed in the Australian Touring Car Championship so far. This is the 7th and final round of a title that started back in 1960, and that's the point score at the moment up until now. And Mr. Consistency, the man, one of few that's been in every round, leading it with the title locked up, Dick Johnson.
And it's interesting, Will, to look at the potential point score situation at the end of this race. If Peter Brock maintains his 2nd position, he'll end up with 96 points, which will put him 1 ahead of Peter McLeod, who currently holds 2nd place in the title on 95, and McLeod has retired. But Warren Cullen, if he holds down his 5th position, will finish the series on 98 points and will take 2nd place from Brock 3rd, with McLeod relegated to 4th from his current 2nd position. So if I was Peter McLeod, I'd be in the pits at the moment trying desperately to get my car repaired to go out and even pick up 1 point for 20th position. And as we look across to the pits, McLeod is out of the car and sitting beside it. Someone ought to go and tell him.
Well, a lot of people say, though, nobody remembers anything but the leader, and I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Well, I think for people like Peter McLeod, who's an amateur racer coming 2nd in the Australian Touring Car title, to drivers like Dick Johnson, Peter Brock, would be a real feather in your cap.
Coming up on to Brian Thompson, the Shepparton driver, in the Camaro that he recently bought from Bergman. And there he is, Brian Thompson. Gee whiz, he's been around a long while. I can remember him in the supercharged Holden, the high-tailed, had twin rear wings, virtually leading Leo Gagan at Bathurst in a Lotus Elite. By virtue of those cars, it's obvious that that was an open Bathurst race meeting, not the only form of car racing that's there now, the James Hardy 1000. Thompson, truck dealer for many years in Shepparton. Enjoys his motor racing. Wouldn't say he's exactly got into the right sort of car for success, but then again, it probably didn't cost him a lot of money. As with 19 laps completed, Grace leads Brock, but not by very much, from Johnson in 3rd place. 4th place is Gary Scott still. 5th place is Warren Cullen. 6th place is Steve Harrington. 7th place still Jim Richards. Can't make that gap. And Murray Carter, another Mazda RX-7, 8th.
10.22 seconds separates Alan Grace back to Gary Scott in 4th position.
Brock surges towards Alan Grace as they come onto the bowl for the 20th time. Coming up to complete 4/7 of race distance, which is an awfully handy fraction.
Fallen a little off the race record, back to 59.96 seconds, as David Cox in the Mazda RX-7 gets between them, but not for long. Different tyre situation here again. Grace running Avon tyres, front and rear, while Brock is on Dunlops.
Oh, very close to the nose there of another car that then springs his hand out the window as the driver's alerted to the fact that the leaders sometimes cannot make too much allowance, with Brock trying to glue himself to Grice, and Johnson really not so very far behind them. The gap 1 to 3, 2.4 seconds only.
Interestingly, Grice has 3 compounds of tyre on his car on the left-hand side. On the 2 tyres on the left-hand side, he's running a very hard compound to compensate for the really abrasive track off the bowl. On the front right rather, he's running a medium compound tyre, and on the front rear, he's running a really soft tyre.
This was the sort of tactic used by Fury up at Surfers, where they grooved the tyre, at Lakeside at least, for the last round in his victory, where they grooved the tyres differently between the outside and the inside tyres. Lap 22 now of 35. Brock stalking Grice. Grice, called him the malevolent interferer in the Touring Car Championship, the man that never had any intention of doing the entire championship and therefore really of trying to win it. But my gee, he's loved interfering and having a good argument. He really enjoys the cut and thrust of racing, where Brock needs results, finishes, consistency, titles to justify his sponsorship. Dick Johnson, of course, wrapped that up in fine way this year. So Brock trying to work out what to do with one of the hardest arguers in Australian motor racing, a man more ready to lean on another car to do a bit of panel damage than most, Alan Grice, the race leader.
Well, Grice in the pits this morning was wonderful, Will. He was superb. He was wandering up to every competitor and saying, you know, I only wish every race was 10 first corners, because I love first corners. I love rushing in there and getting the lead no matter who I've got to lean on. And he had half the amateurs in the field quaking in their boots by the time the race started.
Well, you
today.
saw Peter Brock treating him with a certain amount of discretion earlier on when Grice came down inside him on the bowl. And we look at Gary Scott, 4th place, behind Dick Johnson in 3rd, the pair we were watching. Gary Scott, the son of very popular late Queenslander Glyn Scott, single-seater driver for many years. Scott went to England, tried to make it there in single-seaters, didn't quite. For that matter, nor did Jeffrey Brabham, who has, in American racing, very, very hard.
Brian Thompson stopping on the main straight.
To make it in Europe, you need a lot of money. But Scott came back with no particular disgrace on him by that failure, and has now been well integrated into the Nissan team. Will be running next weekend at Amaru, where incidentally Chris Gibson, the charming wife of Fred Gibson, will not be running the Pulsar Turbo. Howard Marsden's decided to protect her and the car from the scrapes that seem almost inevitable at Amaru, but says it's in great long-distance trim, and we will be running it in long-distance races later in the year. One long-distance race we'll be very interested in will be the 400-kilometre touring car prelude to Bathurst at the refurbished Sandown circuit in September.
An announcement to be made about that event in the next couple of weeks, Will. It's said that it will be extended to 500 kilometres this year, which will involve an extra pit stop for the drivers, make it a very interesting tactical event.